before we go into any more programming in these lessons, we first need to look very briefly at errors and exceptions. Now in this lesson we're not going to get very deep into errors and exceptions. We'll do that at a later time, but we do need to be aware of errors and what they're telling us and how we can prevent them and fix them when they occur. So we're going to look at this. I'm going to paste some code here. And we're going to run this, and we can already tell that something's going wrong here in our compiler. And if we hover over it, it's going to tell us invalid syntax. If we run it, again, we see a syntax error, but it repeats what we have, and it displays a little arrow pointing to the earliest point in the line where the error was detected. The error is caused by a missing colon. So when we put that colon in, which we'll do in just a minute, the error will go away. But it is telling us that it is just usually before that spot right there where that arrow is. So we know that the error was caused by a missing colon. When we run that, we see the error goes away. And we'll get rid of that line. We can clear our panel here. Now with exceptions, our line of code can have everything that it needs to run, but still cause an error when an attempt is made to execute it. So an example of this is if we type in 5 times 5 divided by 0. Now we notice we don't get the red line there, so it's not telling us that there's an error there yet. But when we run it, we get an exception because we cannot divide 5 divided by 0. So it's telling us at the bottom line here, 0 division error, division by 0. It tells us what the exception is. In the Python documentation, there is a whole list of built-in exceptions, and I will link them below this video if you want to go through and look through that list. Later on in our programming, we'll do things called handling exceptions. And again, we're not going to get really deep into this in this lesson, but I do want to show you what is available to you and what we will look at later on. So I'm going to paste some code up here. I'll explain a little bit about what's going on, and then we'll run it and we'll see how it works. But basically what this is going to do is it's going to try to take an input from the user. So we have right here, it's going to ask us to please enter a number that is not 0. It's going to assign that to a variable, which is x. We're again going to take another variable, x value, and we're going to make sure that this is an integer. We're going to make sure that what was entered was assign it as an integer. And then we're going to check to see if x value is greater than 0. If it is greater than 0, it's going to print out 5 divided by the x value. And then it's going to stop running. That's what break means. And we'll go over this when we go over if and else if statements. If it's not true, then it's going to tell the user that the amount cannot be 0 or negative and to try again. So what this does is this prevents the user from seeing an error if for some reason 0 or a negative number is entered into the console. So we'll run that. It's going to ask us to enter a number that's not 0. So for this, we'll just put 5, and we see that it actually prints out 1. It's doing 5 divided by 5 in this print statement right here because it was greater than 0. So we'll run it again, and we're going to actually put a 0 in there to try to cause an error. Now without this code in there, this would throw an error. So we're going to say 0, and we see it tells us amount cannot be 0 or negative, please try again, and it gives us an option to try again. And as I said, later on in another lesson we'll go over a lot more with error handling, exceptions, raising exceptions, exceptions chaining, user-defined exceptions, things like that. But just know right now that the console will tell you errors. It will help you figure out those errors, and if you take time to read, if you don't know what an error means, you can look it up, and that will help you solve problems in your program.